Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome to this Know Your Rights presentation by the Michigan chapter of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And I'm going to be bringing on my colleague in a moment who will be giving an explanation. And this Know Your Rights presentation is predominantly an explanation based upon an analysis, a legal analysis, and we can also say a clarification of a new House bill that's come up that some people in the community are concerned about, House Bill 4474. And this is the strengthening of basically a pre-existing bill that has been in existence for a number of years. The Michigan's ethnic intimidation statute, which has been renamed or is being rebranded as not being ethnic intimidation, but being expanded, and in part because sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, or gender identity or gender expression, have been included in regards to the state's hate crime statute, that if people are targeted due to a number of pre-existing identity traits, which have already been in law, such as race, ethnicity, national origin, sex, disability, gender, or I mentioned sex, gender, also religion, if I'm not mistaken. But a lot of this relates to national origin, have been under the bill. And we've called in years past for people to be charged and prosecuted under the ethnic intimidation statute of the state of Michigan. Well, now two other aspects have been are proposed to be added. And there is some language within the bill that has caused some people pause, which includes the wording of mental anguish, bringing people mental anguish. So we want to discuss that in regards to this bill. I'm going to call on my colleague now, Sister Amy. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, Brother Dawood.
Okay, so I'm going to step off and then come back on, and Sister Amy will give you a presentation, brief explanation about House Bill 4474, 4474.
All right, Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So as Brother Dawood said, CAIR Michigan received a lot of calls, emails, letters when the announcement that this bill had passed out of the House, with concerns over the possibility of criminalizing speech because of the changes in the bill. So we thought it would be kind of important to come on here today and kind of clarify what this bill does and does not criminalize, and the ways in which it may impact our community. As Brother Dawood said, we have in the past called for the ethnic intimidation law, which will now be called the Hate Crimes Act, if it passes the Senate and then is signed into law by our governor. We called for people to be charged, including just 2 years ago when on 9/11, when we had a sister of ours who was attacked on an airplane and called a terrorist. And in fact, after our calls for that person to be charged under the Ethnic Intimidation Act, she was charged, and pursuant to the actual law, we were able to get our client monetary damages or an award of money against the person who had attacked her in such a nature, based on the way that this law is. So all of those provisions are still in the law. What's being changed is a little bit of the wording and the types of crimes that are going to be available to be charged under the act. And I think that's kind of what has people concerned. So first of all, it's kind of important to understand that there are two ways a criminal law can be enacted. It can be either a specific intent crime or just a general intent crime. And a specific intent crime means you have to intend to commit that type of crime in order for it to be charged against you. In the original draft the original way that this bill was enacted, it was a specific intent crime, which means that in order to be charged with a hate crime or an ethnic intimidation crime under the bill as the law as the way it stands now, you have to intend that your actions were done, your intent has to be that you were intending to commit the crime based on the fact that the person was belonging to a protected class, whether it was because of their race, their national origin, their religion, or their gender. So you had to actually commit the crime with the intent that you were doing it because of those acts. The law changes under this bill so that it is no longer that type of specific intent crime. It is more generalized. Right now, you do not have to intend that your actions are intimidating or harassing another individual. They just have to intimidate or harass. And it also changes the way that it defines how bias plays a part. Right now, bias, under the way that the law is enacted currently, the primary motivating factor of the crime that you're committing has to be bias. It has to be because the person is part of a protected class. However, with the new bill, the way that it is, bias no longer has to be the only factor, and it no longer has to be the primary factor. You could be attacking somebody, and if one of the many reasons that you're doing it is because they belong to a protected class, you could still be charged under the hate crimes bill, the way that it's proposed in the House right now. And how that has an effect is that it makes it easier to charge people with hate crimes because you don't have to prove that their primary or their sole intent was bias, but just that it was one of the motivating factors. So it actually makes it easier to charge these crimes against everybody who would look to engage in criminal activity based on someone's protected status. And as Brother Dawood said, it also adds two new categories in line with the similar way that they were added to the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. It adds protection for people to protect them from being attacked because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity or gender expression. And they're protected whether or not the attacker is correct in the attacker's identification of somebody's sexual orientation. So the term they use is real or perceived. So if somebody perceives somebody to have a certain gender identity or a certain sexual orientation, and then the attack is based in part on that, then whether or not the person actually ascribes to that gender identity or sexual orientation, it's still considered to be a hate crime. Another way that this bill would change the law is it changes the types of activities that are criminal. So under the ethnic intimidation law that's enacted currently, physical violence is a crime when the physical violence is done for the purposes of intimidating or harassing somebody based on their characteristic. However, the new bill that's passed by the House, it actually changes that so that intimidating or harassing somebody based on their protected status is actually a crime. It also adds a separate category for when an attack causes severe mental anguish on somebody, against the victim. And severe mental anguish is caused through either an attack of physical harm or based on a series of actions and events that are intended to intimidate or harass the person based on their protected status. It also adds, the original bill also had a separate category of crimes for crimes that were committed against property. And it was real property or personal property, meaning if you defaced or harmed property of an individual or, for instance, a religious institution because of the type of religion that it is or because of who the person was, that was a crime. That's still the crime under the House bill, but it also adds two separate categories for when there's a crime against property, and it includes actual digital property or online property, meaning that if you're attacking or harassing somebody online because of their status as in a protected class, or you are commenting on their pictures or you're posting inappropriate images of them in a way that's intended to harass or cause them mental harm, then you will also be charged under this new bill. And that's something that's brand new. It's adding that layer of protection for people to engage in their life online without being afraid of being attacked or defamed online because of their status as a protected person. So those are the ways that the crime is, the bill has really changed. One of the other major ways that it has changed is the original bill has one felony, and the felony was punishable by up to 2 years in prison and up to $2,000 in fines. Now, the fines for the original felony that could be charged have been lowered, and the time in prison has been lowered. But what it actually does is this bill would add an enhanced felony. So the enhanced felony would raise the time in jail that a person could spend to 5 years in jail, and it would also raise the fine to $10,000. But the enhancement is based on 5 specific criteria. The crime that was perpetrated against the victim actually caused great bodily harm or mental anguish, that the person who was being charged and convicted of the hate crime had been convicted under the statute previously, if the victim is a minor under the age of 18, if 2 people are acting together to commit a crime against somebody based on their status as a member of a protected class, or if you are in possession of a firearm while you are engaging in a hate crime. All of those 5 things will get you an enhancement where you could be charged with $10,000 in fines or 5 years in jail, or both. The other thing this bill will do is it raises the minimum civil damages. So under the current ethnic intimidation law, if somebody is charged with a crime of ethnic intimidation in conjunction with another crime they committed against you, you could take the person to court personally outside of the criminal court. In the civil court, you could take the person to court civilly, and you could get $2,000 in damages, or your actual damages, whatever is higher. So if you've had a physical assault or they've damaged your property, you'd be able to get the actual damages of the property or $2,000, whichever is higher. And that's actually what we were able to do in our case against the lady who attacked our client on Spirit Airlines. However, under the new bill, it raises the minimum amount of damages to $25,000. So you go to civil court for somebody who's been charged with a hate crime, and you get a $25,000 minimum, or you get your actual damages, whichever is higher. So it actually strengthens it and provides a civil money penalty that's significant enough to probably deter a lot of people from acting in this manner, for the foreseeable future. And that's actually a really good provision of the bill, in my opinion. It actually makes it a very strong deterrent. And that's important because sometimes people don't act appropriately unless they have some kind of fear that they're going to be harmed. And you actually can get the civil money penalties in civil court whether or not the person is convicted. So they don't have to actually be convicted of the hate crime for you to get the damages. They only have to be charged with it. So now let's talk, let's get down to the nitty gritty. Let's get down to the part that people such as Fox News and other people are saying is problematic and has created concerns over the fact that they believe that the Michigan legislature is criminalizing speech. So they believe that when the Michigan legislature, the House, intended to add provisions to this bill that regarding intimidation or harassment, they believe that it's a criminalization of speech. And the real fear is that somebody who has a religious objection to utilizing pronouns that are different than the pronouns that would normally be associated with somebody's biological sex at birth, that they would be charged with a crime. And I don't believe that the way that the bill is written, that is actually true, because the House bill actually very purposefully provides 2 very important definitions. The first definition of what does it mean to intimidate or harass? What kind of conduct will get somebody charged with intimidation or harassment under this statute? And the second one is severe mental anguish. Because I know that we received a lot of concerns that somebody would just have to maybe cry or say that they were upset to be able to get somebody to charge under the statute. And that's just not true. So let's talk about the first one first, which is the intimidate or harass. So in order to be found guilty or to be charged under the intimidation or harassment prong of this criminal law, somebody would have to engage in a willful course of conduct, meaning that it is actually your intent to engage in a series of behavior. Course means series of behaviors. So you'd have to willfully intend to engage in a series of behaviors that has the intent to intimidate or harass somebody related to their status as a member of a protected class, whether it's religion, race, or sexual orientation. So, and it goes further than just, and it defines what is a course of conduct. So you have to engage in a willful course of conduct, and a willful course of conduct is defined as involving repeated or continuous harassment of another. So continuous or repeated harassment of another. So having a religious objection to utilizing pronouns is not likely going to be repeated or continuous harassment. Harassment has a very specific legal term. So that's the other thing. And then in addition to that, they've also limited it. So they've limited it by using what we call, quote unquote, the reasonable person standard. And in law, this is a standard that you use a lot. Reasonable person. It means, what is the everyday person who's walking down the street, who's like is of normal mind and body, what would they feel? So that's the reasonable person standard. So it would involve a reasonable person. In order to get charged under this statute for intimidation or harassment, you'd have to engage in a willful course of conduct that involves repeated or continuous harassment of another that would cause a reasonable person to feel the following things. A reasonable person would either have to feel terrorized, or they'd have to feel threatened, or they'd have to feel molested. And molested has a very specific definition, and it really means that they feel like that they have been like harmed and offended in a very strong way. You'd have to cause them to be frightened, and they'd have to be a reasonable person would have to be intimidated or frightened by the conduct that you're engaging in. So all of these things limit the ways in which this gets charged. And in addition to a reasonable person having to feel these things, the victim would actually have to feel those things. That's how the law is written. So you cannot intimidate or harass somebody unless you've engaged in a willful or intentional, willful also means intentional, series of actions that are repeated or continuous that would cause a reasonable person to feel terrorized, threatened, molested, frightened, or intimidated, and actually causes the person to feel any of all or any of those things. So that's very intentional limiting language. So therefore, harmless or innocent mistakes are not going to get you charged. You have to actually be doing something that is intentionally harmful to somebody else. So the other thing that I know was a concern for people, and we're going to put all of this, we're creating some graphics. All of this is going to be on our website because I know it's a lot of information. It's a lot of legal jargon, but so it'll be all put up on our website after the Know Your Rights presentation. The other definition that caused people a lot of concern is severe mental anguish. That people believe that if you said something to somebody and they broke down in tears, perhaps that could relate to you being charged with a crime. But the legislature was very, very specific, and they created a very what I consider to be a detailed and narrowing definition of severe mental anguish. So severe mental anguish would, in order to the state to prove that somebody has been severely subjected to severe mental anguish, the state would have to prove that there was a substantial change in the victim's mental function that could be perceived by a third party. So it's not subjective. So we have a difference between a subjective and an objective standard. Subjective means that's how I feel. It's based on your own internal feelings. And objective means that it's something that's understood or being able to be seen or observed by somebody else. So this is an objective standard. So you'd have to have a significant mental change in your mental function such that somebody else could perceive that. And not only do you have to have that significant mental change, the change in your mental function, this would have to be caused by one of the following things. And the legislature only enumerated 4 things that could cause severe mental anguish. Only 4 things. And the first one was when the assailant or the person who's alleged to have committed the crime intentionally inflicted great bodily harm or threatened great bodily harm. So you can be subjected to mental anguish when there's been great bodily harm caused to you, and great bodily harm has its own criminal definition that has been very long-standing, or there's been a threat of great bodily harm to you as the victim, if there's been a threat of imminent death to the victim, or if number 3 and number 4 really have to do with mind-altering substances. If somebody gives somebody a mind-altering substance or performs any medical procedure, or it says procedure, but the intent is clearly medical procedure, that interferes with one's sense of self, that or they threaten to do that, then those could cause substantial change in mental function as long as it's perceived by another. So those, in order to get charged under the mental anguish prong of this statute, that's what would have to be proven, that there was a change in mental status and that one of the four things were committed: great bodily harm, threat of great bodily harm, threat of imminent death, administering or threatening to administer mind-altering substance, or perform a procedure that interferes with one's sense of self. Other than that, words alone will never be enough to get you charged under the severe mental anguish prong of this statute. And words alone are very unlikely, unless they're pervasive, bullying, actually harassing, or intimidating, are not going to be enough to get you charged under the criminal prongs of the statute. And so I hope that really clears this up for people, and I hope you have a better understanding. I think we can probably take questions. I think Brother Dow is going to come on again and kind of give like a small synopsis. But I just think it's important to understand that when this hate crime bill is enacted, and if it is adopted by the Senate and then signed by the governor, it will strengthen the ability for everybody who's been a victim of a hate crime to be able to enforce their rights under this act. And that includes hate crimes that are based against religious minorities such as Muslims. So this is not something that we necessarily should be opposed to. And I don't think that it really raises any cause for concerns for religiously observant people who have other concerns outside of the criminal statute.
Thank you, Sister Amy. To make a couple of other points, one relating directly to this bill, and just a general comment. And if you have anyone in the viewing audience, if you have a question for Sister Amy regarding the legislation, then please you can post it now, and you can also always email our office, and our contact email is on our website at CAIR-MI.org, www.cairmichigan.org. The first thing is that, look, people have concerns also, like if an imam said he disagrees with transgenderism on the pulpit, and he specifically talks about his views or writes about it, can he be criminalized or charged with a hate crime if people who identify with LGBTQ are offended by it, or they claim that causes them mental anguish? The answer to that is no. Okay, that's number one, right? It is not limiting one's ability to write or to preach in general in relationship to disagreeing with the LGBTQ plus community regarding sexual orientation and or gender identity or gender expression. This is the first thing to clarify. The second thing is, and I want to mention three things, that we as an organization, we have no problem putting out statements and actually putting out action alerts to call state representatives on state bills or federal bills. We've done this many times over the years, right? So if we saw this as a constitutionally problematic bill, such as the concerns we raised about the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, we would have done weeks ago, we would have put out a statement, we would have made a video explaining why we had a problem, and we'd have put out an action alert, right? As we've done in the past with a number of other things. So the reason why you've contacted us and wondering how come we didn't put out a statement against it, well, that's the reason why, right? And Sister Amy gave a very thorough explanation. And I suggest that you share this video on social media and your WhatsApp groups for people who have any questions. The third thing is general nasiha. In a dino nasiha, min aqwal nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that transparent, the deen is transparency, transparent advice. And just keep in mind that many people have floated around a Fox News story, for instance, or some other media from the right. How we ascertain what's legally correct or incorrect doesn't come from Fox News, nor does it come from MSNBC, right? Because both of those news outlets and their pundits have a clear political bias, right? So just because you may be concerned about overreaching of civil liberties and religious freedoms pertaining to the LGBTQ community doesn't mean that you should just be believing every single article or discussion point from Fox News. Like Fox News are not our awliya, and MSNBC is not our awliya either, right? So I just want to be clear about that because on some of these issues, people are floating around certain stories without getting legal opinions, without even fact checking everything, and it's causing confusion in the community, hence why we are doing this live. And I know some people may say, well, this is part of a greater agenda. Well, we are concerned about Islamophobia from the right and Imanophobia from the left. We are concerned about both when we keep our eyes on things, but uh, we are a nonpartisan organization who looks strategically about how we're going to defend our rights. But the hakika is neither one of the political dispensations or political parties necessarily fully protects our religious rights and aligns with our values. And hence, uh, we are a nonpartisan organization, and we criticize both parties, and we've filed legal actions and lawsuits from people who align with the left and people who align with the right. So I just want to put that out there, that if you have questions about civil rights issues or religious rights, you can contact our office and we can give you a quick explanation. And if need be, there could be something more thorough that's put out, as the infographics will be put out, and we're going to circulate things tomorrow, more to the community in writing. So that's just the comments that I had to make. And uh, we don't need to be a community that says that, oh, just because we have maybe over aligned, in some people's opinions, over aligned with the political left or the progressives, that now we have to run to the right as if the right are our bosom buddies. And just look at the recent statement in another state of Congresswoman Marjorie Green Taylor, if you don't believe me, and the wretched things she just said about Muslims and Islam. Like, uh, we have problems on both sides of the political aisle. And I just had to say that for all of you Fox News promoting Muslims out there who just think that we're supposed to believe everything that Fox News says just because MSNBC has put out some garbage recently as it relates to our community. So those are my comments. I don't see any questions, Sister Amy. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we conclude?
I think I just want to make one small comment because I know a lot of people are very concerned about the right to free speech. And I know we've had some questions, and this is sort of a little bit off topic, but kind of goes along the lines of our topic. We've had some questions about whether or not people are going to be required to use pronouns that they believe do not conform with the sexual birthmark, like someone's sex assigned at birth, or their sexual gender markers at birth. And I just want to say that it's definitely not a concern for this bill, right? It's just not, like, that's not enough to get you charged under this bill. We should always be respectful to people in the way that we can, that best suits our own religious beliefs as well. So we don't have to go against our religious beliefs to be respectful to people. So there's a ways around using the gender pronouns, but also in the place of the workplace, there's been a lot of concerns about whether or not people are going to have to use, preferred pronouns in the workplace. And I just like to say that it's something that's still being litigated in the court. But in Michigan, we sit in a very good federal circuit who had a case come out about a year and a half ago that was very favorable to religious rights, that indicated that if you are an employee, you cannot be forced to, against your religious values, to utilize preferred pronouns. And they considered that to be compelled speech. And I believe that a recent court decision that just came out in the Supreme Court, that came out last week with regards to a 303 creative versus somebody else. It's also a compelled speech case. I think that compelled speech case is going to only strengthen the Sixth Circuit's position that you cannot be forced against your religion to utilize preferred pronouns if you have a sincere religious objection to doing so. And I just kind of wanted to put that out there because a lot of the concerns that I'm seeing coming from the community really have to do with religious objections to utilizing preferred pronouns. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear and all on the same page about that before we end this stream, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Sister Amy, for that clarification. And this has been our position all along, that freedom of speech goes both ways. And just as we have the freedom to say certain things, we also have the freedom to be quiet. We have the freedom to stay silent, right? And that's not just in criminal matters like Miranda rights, right? If you're being detained and you can be quiet and have to speak to law enforcement. It also means that you can't be compelled to say anything that goes against your bona fide, sincerely held religious beliefs. Like, hence, I don't use pronouns. When people ask me what my pronouns are in activism spaces or meetings I've had with government officials, I don't even answer the question, right? When people, go by or they say their preferred pronouns, I just speak directly to the person or individuals without even using their name, much less any pronouns, right? So that's my personal workaround based upon how I understand not violating the command of the Quran, la tabusul haqq bil batil, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands in the Quran, do not dress up the truth with falsehood. So for me and my understanding of the Quran, as someone who's studied this tradition, it is religiously forbidden when you know something to be not true and to try to dress it up as it is true, or something batil means bogus, and you try to dress it up as it is reality, right? So I don't even get into that from my understanding of the Quran, right? So that's just my understanding and my personal preference. And you who are watching it, you have your freedom of conscience of whether you want to entertain telling people that you are a he, him, even though you have a deep voice with a beard. If you want to entertain that, that's fine. That's on you. Right? I just don't even entertain that as a choice, because for me it's posing something as a choice that it's a false choice, right? So anyway, that's just my personal belief. With that, my brothers and sisters in Islam, I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all of your good deeds that you have done during this month of Dhul Hijjah. For those of you who have family members who are in the Hijaz, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept their Hajj and their Ziyarah and to have them return back safely to you. One of our CAIR-Michigan board members won Hajj this year. We're waiting for him to return. In this month of Dhul Hijjah, this 12th month, and this one of the 4 sacred months, we ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq to fast the important days of the rest of the month. Yom al-Khamis, Thursday, being one of those important days, the day that is sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to fast tomorrow, on which is Thursday. And we ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us be amongst those who are sincere for His sake, and to be of those who spend for His sake fi sabilillah, seeking His wajh, seeking His countenance. Ya Rabbil Alameen, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal asri, innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi